Billy Williams is a world-class cinematographer, having worked on numerous important British and American movies of the 20th century. The film version of D.H. Lawrence's drama romance Women in Love, directed by Ken Russell, and the beautifully moving On Golden Pond, starring Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda. His exceptional work on these and other highly respected pictures would gain him an Academy Award in 1983 for his outstanding photography on Richard Attenborough's film Gandhi.
My father was a cinematographer, and he started in 1910, and he joined the Navy in the First World War and filmed the surrender of the German fleet at Scapa Flow in 1918. He then went on to work in every branch of filmmaking: travelogues, documentaries, training films, newsreels, and a few features. So we moved to Morden in Surrey when I was a few months old, and I lived there until I married Anne. But I grew up, my childhood was surrounded by camera equipment because my father always owned his own cameras, 2 or 3 as a rule. And I remember one of them was a hand-cranked debris that he still used to film the titles to any film he was making, because he could do a dissolve in the camera. And so this filmmaking was kind of ingrained in my childhood. And I grew up in the war years. School leaving age was 14. And I left school at 14, and I had a choice of becoming my father's apprentice or joining an uncle who had a business in the city. He was a stock jobber. And my mother would have preferred me to have done that because of the security. But I made the choice to go with my father. And so I became his apprentice, and we travelled all over the British Isles making travelogues. There was one in the Derbyshire Dales, another one in Cornwall, and short films like the Punch and Judy show. And we did a lot of training films for the Admiralty, and it was a very good training. My father was very particular, especially about the maintenance of the camera, and the camera was looked after like it was a baby, because if the camera didn't work, he didn't work, because in those days there weren't the rental companies where you could just take something off the shelf. So he did all his own camera maintenance. And the highlight actually of my period with my father was when we went to Kenya in Uganda when I was 17, and we made educational films for the Colonial Office. And so I lived for 8 months in Kenya in Uganda, under canvas and in mud huts, and of course it was like a boy's own adventure in this beautiful country. And I went into the RAF, National Service, as a photographer for 2 years. And when I came out of the RAF, I felt that I wanted to broaden my experience a bit more, and I decided that I would leave working with my father and look for a job. And I got a job with a newly formed company called British Transport Films, and they made films about all forms of transport: the railways, the docks, the inland waterways, because the whole transport network had been nationalised under the Labour government after the Second World War. And so I travelled all over the country again, but I had an ambition to get into feature films. And the position in the British film industry then was that you had feature films, which were like the Premier League, and then documentaries and training films and so on were of a much lower order, and particularly regarding technical skill on the camera. And so if you wanted to work in features, you generally started in the studio, making the tea and then loading the film and becoming a clapper loader and becoming a focus puller and a camera operator, and eventually what was called a lighting cameraman. In this country. In America you were known as the director of photography, which of course sounded a great deal more prestigious. But really we're cinematographers, that's our craft, photographers of movement. And so I had this ambition, but I didn't know how to move across. And I think it was about the 60s, commercial television came in. And this provided a stepping stone because directors and designers and producers came from all over. They came from feature films, from the theatre, from television to make commercials. And it was a whole new style of filmmaking because you had to tell a story in 30 seconds. 60 seconds was a long commercial. So 30 seconds, sometimes 15 seconds. So the whole grammar of filmmaking was changed. And things had to be much more concise and striking and immediate. But I learnt a lot about lighting, and I also was fortunate in meeting directors such as Ken Russell and John Schlesinger, Ted Kotcheff, and some years later, when I got my feature break, I worked with them all. And so it was a period, I suppose, of gaining experience and understanding and making personal contacts.
Williams got his first feature film break as cinematographer in 1965, working on the B-movie comedy directed by Jeremy Summers, San Ferry Ann.
With a wonderful cast, some of whom were in the Carry On series. And it was a story of a family going on holiday from Dover to Calais and encountering all the kind of eccentricities that the British would feel about the French. A lot of very obvious jokes, but it was beautifully played. There was no dialogue. There was a wonderful soundtrack by Ron Goodwin. And it was about 60 minutes long. And in those days, this is the mid-60s, there would very often be a double feature. So you'd have your main film and like a B picture supporting it. So that was my introduction, and I loved working on black and white. And in fact, when I'm working now, when I'm lighting a set and composing for the camera, I'm thinking in tonal terms, light and shade, because I feel that gives a greater depth to the image, and one is able to focus the audience attention, I think, if you're considering the tonal values as well as the colour values.
At the age of 36, Billy Williams would get his big break on a big movie, with thanks to its producer Harry Saltzman and director Ken Russell, the espionage thriller $1 Billion Brain.
Harry Saltzman said to Ken Russell, well, who do you want to photograph it? And Ken asked for me. And I'd only ever shot half a dozen commercials with Ken a few years before. So I went along, and I happened to be shooting it on a little musical with Vanessa Redgrave, directed by Tony Richardson, called Red and Blue. So I borrowed the cutting copy and showed it to Harry and Ken in his private cinema in Mayfair. And then Harry turned to Ken and he said, well, let's give the kid a break. I was 36 years old. So that was my big break, $1 Billion Brain. So we went out to Finland in the freezing winter where the sea freezes. And there were lots of scenes on the ice. I remember there was one particular scene with Michael Caine where he's on the run, and the Baltic Sea was broken up by an icebreaker so that the shipping could get to Helsinki. So there were these great ice flows, and Ken Russell had got Michael Caine jumping from one ice floe to another without any protection whatsoever. I mean, if he slipped, but good for him, Michael, he did it. But it was a spy story with a lot of action scenes. And after we'd finished in Finland, we came back to Pinewood, where we had most enormous sets to light. And I was really struggling because I'd never encountered anything like this before. But I was very lucky. I'd been introduced to a wonderful camera operator, David Harcourt, who was very generous in sort of guiding me and helping me. And I learnt a lot from David, particularly how to treat the actors, because he explained to me, how important it was that the performance was there, because all that we do with the camera and the design and the makeup and so on is fine. It's all part of the filmmaking process, but if you don't have the performance, you're not going to have a good film. And so I learned a lot from David, and also had a wonderful electrical crew, and they were, a great help. So this was my first big picture.
Who ordered you to kill me?
I had to do it. It was an order from the brain.
Get out!
Following this, Williams would be BAFTA nominated for his work on The Magus, directed by Guy Green, before joining Ken Russell again for his now classic version of the D.H. Lawrence romantic and dramatic novel Women in Love, featuring the famous nude wrestling scene between Oliver Reed and Alan Bates.
Well, Women in Love was visually the most exciting film that I ever worked on, and Ken was a very visual director, very supportive and understanding of what I was trying to do. And it's a wonderful subject in that it has so much to say about the social scene in England. This was about the time of the First World War, and we were able to shoot in wonderful locations in Derbyshire, Yorkshire, Durham, and it was nearly all made on location. The wrestling scene and several other scenes, including the scene on the lake when the couple get drowned, were at a place called Elverston Castle in Derbyshire, which you might know because you're from Derbyshire. And we had this wonderful room with a vaulted ceiling, and the walls were painted with gold fleur-de-lis on a dark blue, and it had a huge fireplace. And so we built a log fire. Now, you don't very often see a log fire in movies because of the sound problem, because the wood crackles. And so that you usually finish up with a gas fire, which to me never looks very convincing. But Ken wanted it to look right. So he wasn't worried about the crackling of the logs, because for the wrestling scene, the main part of it was shot with two handheld Arriflex 2C cameras, which weren't blimped. So we had camera noise anyway. So we had one camera with a wide-angle lens, another one tighter with about 50. David Harcourt and Mervyn Wilson were operating. Well, when we came to do the scene, we started off with the full nude scene, and of course, I think the actors were both a bit anxious about this, particularly Ollie. And they stripped off, you see, and Ollie looked at Alan and he said, "He's got a bigger donger." And he went off the side of the set and he said, "I'm going to have a quick jodrell." So he just went off the set and came back, and we went into it, you see. But of course, I think he was just trying to break the ice, and it sort of everybody had a good laugh, and we got into it. Well, we did the nude bit with this flickering firelight with the two handheld cameras on the first day. And then we needed some more coverage, and of course we needed the dialogue. So we had to switch to the Mitchell camera, which was a blimped camera, and we did the dialogues and the closer scenes when they weren't fully naked. But they were marvellous. The actors were absolutely terrific because it was a very dangerous scene. All they had on the floor was a rug with a rubber underlay, and they were very close to this fire, which was extremely hot. So it was the real thing. And that was the thing about Ken. He wanted it to look right.
Love. For men, just a part of life. For women, a whole existence.
My God, when I think of you and your world, it makes my heart sick. You're so limited, you're a dead end. You cannot love.
And you?
I could never love you.
You can't bear anything to be spontaneous, can you? Because then it's no longer in your power. And why? Because you haven't got any real body. Any dark, sensual body of life. All you've got is your will and your lust for power.
You can't have two kinds of love. Rupert.
I've loved you as well as Gudrun.
You don't think you love, do you?
Why do you torture me?
The relationship between four sensual people is limited. They must find a new way. The D.H. Lawrence classic novel, Women in Love.
After being BAFTA nominated for his work on Women in Love, Williams would be assigned as cinematographer to the witchcraft horror The Ballad of Tam Lin, featuring a star turn from Ava Gardner and directed by Roddy McDowall, his first and only time in the director's chair.
Lovely man. He was a brilliant still photographer. He took wonderful still pictures, and he also had a huge collection of movies. And he was a delightful man to work with because he really understood the actors. And Ava Gardner, I think, was 47, and she had lived life. And whenever I had work with her on day exteriors, if it was, say, overcast, I had to cut off all the top light with a huge black canopy and light her from just above the lens with a lamp, a diffused lamp, because otherwise, you know, all the problems showed up. So when you're working with someone like that, you've really got to do everything you can to reassure them. And she was very conscious of the fact that she wasn't as beautiful, because when she was very young, she was absolutely stunning, but I didn't work with her in those days. But Roddy was lovely to work with. Unfortunately, the film, which had sort of independent backing, went through various periods of lack of funds, and it was a long time in the cutting room, and it was a very contemporary film in terms of wardrobe and vehicles, and it didn't come out until about 2 years after we shot it, and it didn't get a good distribution. It was called Tam Lin in this country, and I think in America it was called The Devil's Widow.
Out spoke the queen of the fairyland, and an angry woman was she. She's taken away the bonniest knight in all my company, and the Tam Lin, but
Billy Williams would join director John Schlesinger next for his beautifully open and honest 1970s drama about homosexuality and adult relationships, the controversial for its time, Sunday Bloody Sunday.
I'd worked on some commercials with John, but not anything else. And of course he was very well established by the time we did Sunday Bloody Sunday. And it was a very personal film for him. The story is about a gay doctor played by Peter Finch. Glenda Jackson is a professional woman, a consultant, and they're both in love with a young man played by Murray Head, who's only 21. And so the storyline was very bold and challenging for its day. It was a very rewarding picture to be involved in. John was such a sensitive director.
A new film from the Academy Award-winning director of Midnight Cowboy, Sunday, Bloody Sunday. Sunday, Bloody Sunday.
I do love you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
A new film by John Schlesinger.
Sunday Bloody Sunday would give Williams his third BAFTA nomination. The 1970s would also see a highlight for Billy Williams, working twice with one of Hollywood's greatest stars, Elizabeth Taylor.
She was lovely. She was an absolute joy to work with. She was so funny, lovely sense of humour, very generous person. And she would come to the studio quite early for makeup and hair, and we would have set up the shot the night before, and I would be lighting and setting up the camera and all that. And the director of both these pictures was Brian Hutton. The first picture was called Z & Co, and the second was Night Watch. And Brian Hutton was an ex-actor, and he had a marvellous sense of humour, an enormous repertoire of jokes. And we would usually have to wait a while and until Elizabeth was ready. She wouldn't come onto the set until she was ready. And of course it was makeup and hair and costume and all that to go through. And while we waited, he would tell us jokes. I remember one particular day when she was a little later than usual, so we say, and the producer was pacing up and down, muttering tick-tock and looking at his watch. And Elizabeth came on the set with her entourage. Elizabeth, her makeup artist, her hairdresser, her costume lady, her personal photographer, and finally her bodyguard. And this procession came onto the set. And Brian Hutton turned towards Elizabeth and he said, "Ta-da! Big star! Big movie, big pain in the arse." And Elizabeth fell about laughing. She loved it. She could really take a joke. And that was, And when she got on the set, we'd do run rehearsal. First take, perfect, every time. I never worked with anyone who was more aware of the camera and of what the shot was about. She was a marvellous technician as well as being a great actress, but she knew the camera, she knew the lenses, she knew the lighting. And my first day on this picture at Shepperton, we went to see the rushes, and of course I was very anxious about how this would be, whether the print was okay and everything. First day with Elizabeth Taylor, and we watched the rushes, and when we came out, Richard Burton was there, and he stood by the door as we came out, and he said to me, "Oh, you made her look like a teeny bopper." And I thought, wow. So I said to David, my offer, he said, "I made her look like a teeny bopper," and I said, "Well, that's great, you made her look younger."
This is Z and her husband, Robert. For them, marriage is an intimate game in which cheating is sometimes allowed.
And you love it, you love it, love it! That's why you're still here. You love the uncertainty. You don't know what I did yesterday, or where I went, or who I was with.
Fighting, loving, playing games. They're an absolute ball. And this is Stella.
Do you need a bodyguard?
She wants to play too. But Stella plays for keeps. And so does Z.
I don't mind. I'll fight her a duel any day. And win.
It's no game for beginners.
You first.
No, you.
No, you!
No, you.
No, you!
No, you.
No, you!
Another highlight for Williams, but perhaps not in the way he would have wished, was lighting the comedy western Kid Blue with Warren Oates and Dennis Hopper.
Dennis was not the easiest person to work with, I must say. He really tested the director, who was a very nice guy called Jim Frawley, but it was his first movie as a director. So Dennis gave him quite a tough time.
And so Kid Blue was on the run once more. And all because he did what he had to do. But wait a minute, folks. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Bickford Wiener, alias Kid Blue, and his gang were once regarded as the worst bad men in the West.
Ah, shoot, missed again.
For obvious reasons. If you were Kid Blue, what would you do?
Burn me town. Get a job.
Listen to me. We can get that money. It would be just like the old days. We could get it.
And so Kid Blue was on the run once more.
Help me! Our Father, who art in heaven. Stop that way, policeman! Police!
He was one step ahead of the posse and 100 years ahead of his time.
The early 1970s would see the release of one of the most notorious horror movies of the 20th century, William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Billy Williams would shoot the opening sequence.
The main unit shooting had all been finished, but not the prologue, which is an 11-minute sequence, which is in Iraq, whereas the main body of the film was in America. And I went to Iraq with Bill Friedkin, but I had previously been there 18 years before as a documentary cameraman. So I came back to Iraq and worked with the same people that I'd known all those years before, and they'd become leading lights in the Iraqi film industry. Well, of course, the Ba'ath Party had taken over in the meantime, and I was really surprised that we got permission to shoot, because we went to this wonderful excavation site at Hatra, and we shot the opening sequence with Max von Sydow, the lead actor. And the point of the sequence was to set up, to have this sort of mysterious opening where he is excavating at an ancient site, and he uncovers a little statue, and it's a statue of the demon god, Pazuzu. And this foretells evil, which later on in the film, the Max von Sydow, who's also a priest, it comes to face the devil. And so this prelude, it sets up an atmosphere which doesn't really connect to the rest of the story, except it sets up an atmosphere of foreboding and of good versus evil. And of course, you know, he has to face this poor child who's obsessed. And it was a great sequence to do. And it's extraordinary because during the course of the filming, they'd had tremendously bad luck in that all sorts of things had gone wrong. An actor died, the set caught fire, and instead of my shooting in Iraq in March, I didn't shoot till August. That's how far behind schedule they were. And so when we got there, we were staying in Mosul in the northern area of Iraq, and we had 200 items of equipment, cameras, lenses, lights, and an enormous packing case which contained a statue of this demon god, Pazuzu, and it was about 7 feet high, and this packing case was missing. And without it, we couldn't conclude the sequence, because the final shot of the Iraq sequence is of Max von Sydow confronting this statue with the sun setting in between them, and it's a very dramatic moment. And the statue was missing. Well, at that time, you couldn't make a phone call from Iraq because of the Ba'ath Party, the regime. So David Anderson, the production manager, had to get on a train. He went from Mosul to Baghdad, and he flew from Baghdad to Beirut in order to make a phone call. And they found the statue in Singapore. It had been left on the plane. And so a couple of weeks later, we got it back and we did the sequence. So it was like everything went wrong on this film. It was millions of pounds over budget.
What an excellent day for an exorcism. And I'm the devil. You know what he did? The power of Christ compels you! Lift me!
The Exorcist.
The Glass Menagerie with Katharine Hepburn and Pope Joan with Olivia de Havilland were the other motion pictures Williams photographed in the early 1970s. In 1975, it would become part of the Oscar-nominated action-adventure drama starring Sean Connery, The Wind and the Lion.
John Milius was the writer-director. He was the writer of Apocalypse Now. I remember we were preparing the film in Madrid, and I went into the production office one day. John Milius was casting, and he said, "Oh, Billy," he said, "you can play Sir Joseph." And I said, "What do you mean?" Sir Joseph is a character at the beginning of the film who is the British Vice Consul in Tangier, who is with Candice Bergen before lunch, talking about wine, which wine they're going to drink, and the servants and so on. And I was cast to play this character. And so my big scene came, and I'm all dressed up in a white suit, a stiff collar, an Eton tie, waistcoat with a gold watch and chain, and a shoulder holster with a .45 automatic. And what happens is that I'm talking to Candy Bergman, and this band of brigands come bursting through a trellis like a rose arbor at the end of the garden, and they come charging towards us. And when the first horseman is halfway across a duck pond, I have to get up, draw my gun, shout brigands, move to a mark, take aim and fire. And then fire and take out several other Berbers until I finally face someone who's charging towards me with a drawn sword, and I go to shoot him and I'm out of bullets. So I have to click and damn. And when we came to this scene, you see, I'd got several lines and I'd rehearsed the lines, and I said to John, well, can we have a rehearsal? He said, no. He said, let's go and do some shooting. So he took me off the set, and we spent about 10, 15 minutes, showing how to draw the gun, take aim and fire. And so I shot off a few bullets. He said, no. He said, yeah, this is blanks. He said, you get a bigger recoil with bullets, with real bullets. So I had to get all that right. So we set everything up. Of course, it can't be rehearsed with all these stunts. 5 cameras, and we shoot the scene. I take my cue, get up, shout brigands, draw the gun, move to the mark, take aim, and the first horseman does the most spectacular fall. But I hadn't fired the gun. I got everything right except firing the gun. But, we covered it from the other angles, but that was fine. It made me realise that being in front of the camera, it's not so easy.
Secretary of State to the President. On July 12th, Mr. Ian Pedikaris and his family were kidnapped from their residence in Tangier, and their servants and retainers brutally murdered.
And the right shooting.
This act of barbarous criminality appears perpetrated by Moulay El Razuli.
Do not laugh at me again.
Sheriff of the Riffian Berbers and last of the Barbary pirates.
You are in a lot of trouble. You should never have moved that bishop or kidnapped me. Both will see you undone.
It is not I who decides the outcome of these events. It is the will of Allah.
President Roosevelt will have your head for this.
Budgets don't come much bigger than Williams' next movie, the tragic wartime drama with an all-star cast, including Faye Dunaway and Orson Welles, Voyage of the Damned.
We had 3 scenes in the picture with Orson Welles, and they were separated, but they were very key, important scenes. And the first day he came on the set, and he was so made up. He had far too much makeup on. He looked like a piece of mahogany. So I called the makeup man and I said, well, what's with Mr. Welles? Everybody called him Mr. Welles. I said, what's with Mr. Welles' makeup? He said, oh, he did it himself. So I went to the director and I said, I think he's going to look too made up. And he said, oh, listen, we can't do anything, we've got to shoot. Because Orson Welles had already written all of his scenes, rewritten the dialogue, and I think the director was up to here with anxiety. So we shot the first day's work. At the end of the day, I plucked up courage and I thought, I've got to say something. So I very politely went up to Mr. Welles, said, excuse me, Mr. Welles, I said, but tomorrow, do you think you could wear a little less makeup? And he gave a great belly laugh. He said, oh, I don't wear all this makeup. I look so pasty and washed out. He said, I look terrible. So I felt a bit put down, you see. Well, the next scene the next day was a different part of the film. He came on set, the makeup was perfect. We did the day's work, and towards the end of the day, we were shooting on exteriors, and we were in Barcelona in a courtyard, and he was in a beautiful Hispano Suiza motor car with a beautiful woman. And we're shooting this scene, and it's starting to get dark, and I'm wide open on the lens. And he looked at me and he said, "Is this all right for you?" I said, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Wells." I said, "Yes, we can just get this one shot." And I thought, that's rather nice. He really knew everything about filmmaking. He knew I was short of light, and he was giving me a bit of support.
Photographing a bank heist was next for Billy Williams, the clever crime thriller The Silent Partner with Christopher Plummer. From one bank heist to another, this time a comedy, Williams photographed comedic legend George Burns alongside Art Carney and Lee Strasberg. The movie, Going in Style.
And there was a young director called Martin Brest who was only 27 years old. But did he do a lot of takes? Oh my goodness, I couldn't believe how many takes he was doing with these old guys. But George Burns was like a metronome. Every take was exactly the same. He was extraordinary.
If I got to spend another day doing nothing but sitting around in that park looking at the muggly kids, I'm going to go nuts.
All concerned citizens, we urge you to be on the lookout for these most wanted criminals, now at large in our community. Suspect number 1.
How's about we all go on a stick-up?
George Burns, formerly known as Joe the Dressmaker Harris, age 78, armed with a ridiculous plan. Suspect number 2.
What are we going to stick up?
Art Carney, also known as Al the Singing Bartender McCaffrey, age 71, armed and considering the idea.
Might as well make it a bank, right?
Guess so, might as well.
Willie, what do you think?
Suspect number 3, Lee Strasberg, also known as Willie the Cabbie Goodman, age 74, armed and going along for the ride.
Whatever you say, Joe. You recognize me. No, this is too big. Too big, too big, too big.
And this one?
Too small. That's it. That's not it. Let's start again. Let's start from scratch.
The bank will be closed.
Wait a minute, I know.
These 3 men have been convicted of first-degree comedy and sentenced to going in style.
Boy, don't you look snappy.
Warner Brothers presents George Burns, Art Carney, and Lee Strasberg in Going in Style, a comedy in the first degree.
Williams' next role as cinematographer would be a rather unhappy experience. The science fiction horror, Saturn III.
We had 2 adjoining stages at Shepperton, the biggest set I've ever worked with. You could open A and B stage to form one enormous stage. And we had a set that was supposed to be in outer space, and only a cast of three people: Kirk Douglas, Farrah Fawcett, Harvey Keitel, and a robot. Well, the robot was a man, a very big guy, in a suit. And so it took hours to set this thing up with all kinds of electronics and so on. And the original director was John Barry, not the composer, John Barry, the production designer, who designed the Star Wars films. So he was a brilliant designer. And this was his first film, and he'd written the story. And he asked me to photograph, and I thought, well, this is going to be great. Working with a production designer like this, he knows what he wants. So we started working. We worked for 2 weeks. Monday of the 3rd week, we come on the set, and the producer comes on and tells us that the director's been replaced, and that Stanley Donen, who was one of the producers, was going to take over. Well, Stanley Donen was a lovely man, but you know, he directed musicals like Singing in the Rain and so on. But it was terribly sad that John Barry had been replaced, and he'd been replaced because Kirk Douglas had complained that he was spending too much time with the robot. Well, the robot proved to be a real headache. Anything with the robot took hours. And so he was replaced, and tragically he died not long after that. Yeah.
This year, the inhabitants of Saturn III are about to experience the unthinkable. A nightmare so perfect, it could only have been made by man.
Captain, Major, this is my partner.
There are only 4 inhabitants on Saturn III. One of them is not human.
No! Don't let him touch me!
Do as you're told. Be still.
Get back! Get back!
Billy Williams would be Oscar nominated for his next movie, The Beautifully Shot on Golden Pond, a moving drama with Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda.
The first scene of the film is of this old couple arriving to spend the summer on vacation on the lake. And we had a rehearsal day, and Kate came onto the set to meet Henry Fonda, whom she'd never worked with and they'd never met before. And she came onto the set with a brown trilby hat. And she went up to Hank and said, "Hank," she said, "I'd like you to have this for good luck on the picture. It's Spencer's hat." She gave him Spencer Tracy's hat, which he wears when they arrive in the car. They get out of the car and she says, "Oh, the loons, the loons. They're welcoming us back." And Hank says, "Oh, I can't hear a thing." He goes into the house and he takes off his hat, looks at himself in the mirror and puts on his fishing hat. And later in the film, a young boy joins them. They became buddies and they go fishing and he wears a hat. When the film was over, it was Fonda's last picture. He painted a watercolour of the 3 hats, and he gave the original to Miss Hepburn and a signed copy to every member of the crew, and I've still got the picture. So, to go back to the scene, we rehearsed the scene. So the next day we're all set with the track and everything. We're waiting for Miss Hepburn. She comes on the set looking absolutely stunning. She had on a beautiful outfit. She had a black silk polo neck, black trousers, a beautiful suede leather jacket and a Robin Hood style matching suede hat. She looked like Coco Chanel. And Mark Rydell, the director, looked and said, "What, Kate? This isn't your costume. You're not going to wear this for this scene." And she said, "What's wrong?" I said, don't you like it?" And there then developed the biggest row I've ever seen on a movie set. The language from Miss Hepburn was unbelievable, and it was all directed straight at the director. And the crew just stood there. We were all ready to go, bewildered. We'd never seen anything like it. And in the end, she said, "All right, tell me what you want me to wear." And we went off to her there was a cabin on the lakeside with all her costumes in, all the broken down old clothes that you'd wear on vacation. And we chose something and we shot the scene. Did the day's work. On the way home, I used to travel with the director. Mark Rydell said to me, George Cukor warned me. Now George Cukor worked with Tracy and Hepburn on several movies. He said, George Cukor warned me, should test you on the first day. Now that's some test, isn't it? So we went on to shoot the picture, which was a wonderful picture to do visually because it was, this lovely location. There's one scene in it that was a magic hour scene, which is where Henry Fonda and the young boy Billy go fishing, and they go into a very rocky cove, and it's starting to get dark, and Kate is very worried about them not coming back, so she gets the boatman to go out and search for them. And what's happened is that as they're leaving this cove, the boy is driving, and instead of putting the boat into reverse, he puts it into forward. They crash into a rock. Henry Fonda goes into the water, and the boy jumps in to save him. They both almost drown, and they finish up hanging onto a rock, and it's nearly dark. Katharine Hepburn with the boatman is looking for them with a flashlight. Now in the script, she sees them with the flashlight, and the boat draws up alongside the rock that they're clinging to, and they have a few words. We had a meeting about how this was to be done because Henry Fonda was a very sick man. He had one lung and a pacemaker, and he had to go into the lake twice in September. So we were very concerned about how we would do this. And Miss Hepburn said, well, instead of drawing up alongside on the boat, she said, why don't I see them from a distance with the flashlight, take off my coat, dive in and swim to the rock? Of course, it was a brilliant idea. I saw the picture in New York, and when this scene came up, the audience stood up and cheered because it was such a dramatic moment. But of course, I could only do it once at the magic hour. So we're in the middle of the lake on a raft with 2 cameras, sound. I had a couple of battery lights, and that was it. And that I really had some anxious moments until I saw the rushes the next day, and it was fine. So, I mean, she certainly knew how to steal a scene. After that, she would never talk to the director, about what she was going to wear, whereas we'd had this incident at the beginning, and she'd come to me and say, Billy, how do you like this? And she came up with this red cardigan, which I wasn't very keen on because I felt it was a bit eye-catching, you see. And she said, it's a beautiful colour, Billy. Why don't you like this cardigan? I said, well, it is a bit bright. She said, haven't you ever seen any of the French Impressionist paintings? And I said, yes. And she said, well, they've always got a little bit of red in them. I said, yes, and your eye goes straight to it. That's exactly what I want, she said. She knew how to attract camera.
Universal Pictures proudly presents a very special motion picture. Katharine Hepburn, Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda, on Golden Pond.
Listen, this Norman Thayer Jr. over on Golden Pond.
Oh, Norman, it's so beautiful. Everything's just waking up.
Ethel Thayer. Sounds like I'm lisping, doesn't it?
My, oh my, you have on a tie.
Yes, I know. I put it there.
You look sexy.
I hear you turned 80 today.
Is that what you heard?
Man, that's really old.
You should meet my father.
Hey, oh, Mommy, darling. It means so much to him to have you here.
Look at this little fat girl, Ethel.
Sure, now he's got someone he can pick on.
Good God!
Hey, man, you don't have to yell at me.
He wasn't yelling at you. He was yelling at life.
What the heck does that mean?
Oh, that means he's like an old lion. He has to remind himself that he can still roar.
Scared me half to death. Billy! Billy! That's why I came running back here to you. See your pretty face.
Listen to me, mister. You're my knight in shining armor. Don't you forget it.
It seems that you and me have been mad at each other for so long.
I didn't know we were mad. I thought we just didn't like each other.
I want to be your friend.
Want to dance? Or would you rather just suck face?
Katharine Hepburn, Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda. Lord Great presents a Mark Rydell film, On Golden Pond, from Universal Pictures.
Winner of 8 Oscars, no motion picture could have been larger to photograph for Billy Williams than his next, the biographical epic, Gandhi.
The best story, the best script that I'd ever read, because it was such a wonderful story about this extraordinary man who, wanted to solve problems by peaceful means rather than going to war. And I'd never been to India. I didn't know a great deal about Gandhi. And Richard Attenborough, who lived in Richmond, invited me to his house to talk about the film. This was way back in the spring of 1980. And he gave me this enormous script written by Jack Briley, whom I'd worked with before on Pope Joan and Eagle's Wings. So this was the third Jack Briley script that I did. So I went home and stayed up all night and read it. I knew that Dickie was going to India the next day, so I just sent him a cable and I said, "Yes, love, Billy." And he went to India, and I went to New Hampshire to shoot On Golden Pond, where there were lots of issues regarding the finance and so on, and the finance was only finally put in place. Some of it came from America, and some of it was Goldcrest, but about a third of the budget came from India. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who was the daughter of Pandit Nehru, the first Prime Minister, she set up a film development fund, and they put in about a third of the budget in rupees, so that paid for all the Indian crew and all the fares and that sort of thing. So without her, the film wouldn't have been made. It was a marvellous film to work with, and it was so rewarding and satisfying. You really felt involved, deeply involved emotionally with what this man was trying to do to gain independence for India. And of course Ben Kingsley was such a tremendous actor, wonderful performance, and he'd spend a long time in makeup, especially when he played the old man. And when he came on set, he was entirely in character. He stayed in character the whole day until he came out of makeup. Yeah.
My name is Gandhi, Mohandas K. Gandhi.
Well, whoever you are, we don't want you here. I suggest you get back on that train before it leaves.
They seem to want me.
Columbia Pictures presents a Richard Attenborough film, Gandhi.
100,000 Englishmen simply cannot control 350 million Indians if those Indians refuse to cooperate.
The story of one man whose voice spoke out for millions.
To gain independence, we must prove worthy of it.
His greatest weapon was peace.
In this cause, I too am prepared to die. There is no cause for which I am prepared to kill.
We're required to stop it. And stop it we will.
If you take my husband, I intend to speak in his place.
I want to document coldly, rationally, what is being done here. I believe non-cooperation with evil is a duty, and that British rule of India is evil.
Nevertheless, it is my duty to sentence you to 6 years in prison.
He offered the world a way out of madness.
Men honored him. Women loved him. An empire feared him. A nation worshipped him.
Long live Mahatma Gandhi!
Albert Einstein said, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth. Gandhi, a world event.
The movie was directed by one of British cinema's finest names, Richard Attenborough.
He was lovely. He was very, very understanding, and I mean, he understood the script so well. He'd had this script for years and years, and it'd taken him so long to develop, and it was a great labour of love for him. And yes, he was a very intelligent, well-informed. He understood the actors. He knew what he wanted dramatically, and of course we had so many locations and so many enormous crowd scenes. The logistics were just enormous. Yeah, but it was a marvellous film to be associated with.
For his outstanding work on Gandhi, Billy Williams would win an Academy Award.
Oh, it was a tremendous thrill because Anne, my wife, was with me, and she's been so supportive of me throughout my career. Yeah, we've been married 57 years, and she's really helped me in my career, and she came with me. And the great thing about the Academy Awards is that you don't know if you're going to win. It is a very closely kept secret. And I'd been there the previous year with On Golden Pond when I didn't win, I was nominated. And so I was there the next year again with Anne, and the nominees, the cinematography nominees, you all sit together with your partners. And so you all get to know each other because there are parties, etc. It goes on over a long weekend. It's a great occasion, but when your name comes up, you have to be prepared, and they ask you to go to the stage and to speak for no longer than 30 seconds because the screen time is so precious. But of course there are people that go on for a lot longer, so you have to rehearse and prepare your speech and be ready. But it was a great moment, yes.
After his work on Gandhi, Williams would photograph, amongst others, The Survivors, a comedy drama with Walter Matthau and Robin Williams, and the thriller Suspect with Dennis Quaid and Cher. Billy Williams retired from the world of motion pictures in 1996, but continues to this day to give workshops on the art of cinematography. In 2009 he was awarded the OBE on the Queen's Birthday Honours List for his services to the film industry.
Well, I feel I've been very lucky to have worked on such interesting films and great casts and wonderful actors I've worked with. I feel I've been very fortunate.